So I want to show how a joint can be strained when things aren't moving and you think they should be. You close your garage door. Here's the jaw garage door openers. And gravity on this is the jaw garage door closer, sort of like an articulator. Sometimes one side can be occluded. It maintains forcible closure. You cannot open the garage door on this side because it's occluded with this fixed stability. And you're inside and you push the button to make the genie go out. So you go like this, you go, God, why won't my garage door open? I mean, it's opening kind of on one side, it's stuck on the other. So you goose it some more, and all of a sudden you start to pull the hinges out and the whole thing. So when one side is trying to vigorously open, it's the side that gets damaged. The other side is nice and stable. It's called posterior, it's called stability for the joint, because it's holding, locked, occluded still. The other side has it doesn't have any posterior support. That's what posterior support is. It's a clenched tooth. It's clenched molars. So when you're stable on one side, the other side can be strained in its attempt at reopening. And the way mandibles move is they have propulsion at different parts attached to the mandible. They're not motors that push. They're muscles that pull. It's the same thing. So you can push the table or pull it. There are lateral pterygoids that are attached to that condyle. The force vector goes right through it. You can either grab a condyle and pull it, or you can push it. It's the same thing. So the outboard motor, the propulsion system right here, pulls forward. Those are the lateral pterygoids. They both aim towards the midpoint right about here. When they both contract at the same time, the whole thing goes forward. If you take both of your engines and aim them that way, you still go forward. There's a digastric that will propel that chin down and backwards. If you propel the condyles forward and the chin down and backwards, you get that. And you park your boat like this if you want to. Temporalises pull these coronoid processes up and forward. They usually work at the same time. That's the design, is to close and squeeze as hard as you can bilaterally. That's what you're usually trying to do. A masseter and a medial pterygoid have the same orientation. This medial pterygoid and this masseter have the same orientation. It's for a working movement. When the bolus is over here, you've opened, and now you're going to close over here. So they will propel the mandible that way. If this engine and that engine are running at the same time, you get a conflict. You get an anchoring and a movement and a strain. If you tied your dock line on the wrong cleat, and you boom, it'll rip it right off the boat. These are the diagrams. There's a textbook that we've got. And this is what I've always had in mind as I would draw these other pictures. I said, gosh, you just show the picture I've been picturing myself, you know. Do you think that bilateral posterior contact causes maximum contraction intensity of the temporalis? Or do you see that bilateral contraction of the temporalis motors and bilateral masseter medial pterygoids ends up in bilateral occluding? That's what's happening. When those engines run in that sequence, in that design, that's what gets clobbered. That's where the contacts happen. If you shut down the temporalis motors and just run your advancement lateral pterygoids and have a little bit of masseter engine, you know what you get? Your incisors touch. Incisors don't cause lateral pterygoid activity. Incisor contact is the result of lateral pterygoid propulsion with a little bit of elevation from the masseter. There it goes. You parked it there. What if you crank your temporalis motor on the left, some right side lateral pterygoid, some right side medial pterygoid, and rev it? You get a unilateral posterior contact. If you really crank that one, you will take this thing and it'll really pull, because this anchor is a function of how intensely that elevator is contracting. You can really, really, really get a strong anchor right there. That thing won't budge. The anchor gets bigger as you increase the elevation contraction intensity. So the greater the resistance there, the resistance is a function of the elevator, which creates sort of the anchor. It's the stability right here. The greater the stability, the more you really rev this lateral pterygoid, you will rip that thing right off the dock. You start to see joint damage. You have a displaced disc. This is not a good idea. Or I wonder if the displaced disc was a result of this sort of nocturnal activity. I don't see contact, I don't see blue paint on a molar anymore as a molar contact. I see it as a hypercontraction of a temporalis with the running motor on the opposite lateral pterygoid. That's what that is. Here are the newtons. These are the fig newtons, the force vectors on these teeth during this event. Look at this. Here's unilateral posterior clenching. Here's all that force on that one tooth and not much force on the condyle. That's called posterior support for the joint. If you want to really lean on that tooth and really rev the temporalis on that side, you will compress that tooth. Meanwhile, the motor on this lateral pterygoid reflexively is contracting and it's aiming at the anchor. That's what the bow line does. It's the connection, it's the anchored system right there. All the vector forces are on that line. So this lateral pterygoid was aiming here, and as you rev that thing up, this thing gets crammed immediately. There's nowhere to go. Condyles can go that way. There's nothing over there. So when you get smacked here, this condyle goes that way out into space, and this one goes where? It gets smashed into the medial side of your joint space. So here's this big load and strain right here because you're clenching over there. Why? It's because you don't show the motors on these things. When you've got the propulsion system included in what you see, suddenly a unilateral posterior contact has a whole new meaning. The word contact implies all of those motors are running at the same time. But dentistry has stipulated the occluding of teeth. So why do you think about all the other stuff? We already figured, oh yeah, of course, that's stipulation, that's just occluding. What should I do? I mean, if I can just shave that tooth down, this goes down, why? Well, you're still elevating somehow. Now the next time you shave that down, now the tooth might be contacting up here. And all of a sudden, the circuitry to these motors isn't there anymore. The engines are running much less intensely, so there's not a method to generate the force and the load.